Okay, all right. Half a day, half a day. Okay, all right. Half a day, half a day. We are live. Okay, Spencer, I had to rush to input everything again real fast. But we are live. Half a day. Todos hamza guanahuzong. Buenas, i-finet na episode Fanachu para 2025. It is a new year. It is the same old Fanachu. It's the same old Maget. Half a day. It is the same me. No, I'm just kidding. It is a whole new year. We have whole new episodes. Fanachu has a lot in store for this new year. And I am excited to bring to you sort of as a way to kick off this new year. Um, we ended last year with a number of solidarity episodes, a number of filmmaking episodes, and I'm excited that we can start off 2025 with that same spirit because Fanatsu is a place that is about telling Chamorro stories, but it's also this important platform in which Chamorros connect to others in the Pacific and others in similar situations across the world, indigenous peoples who are struggling to tell their stories, that are struggling in systems for liberation, for decolonization. And so that is what Fanatsu was started as 9 years ago by the group Independent Guahan, and that's what we continue to strive to be up until today. And so I'm very excited to have with me today a filmmaker who, you know, who's going to be talking about a film, The Queen's Flowers. And this is a film which it's award-winning, it's touching, it's very beautiful, and it's a story which I think a lot of us will connect to, but it's also a story that comes from the other end of the Pacific that is different, a different experience of dispossession, displacement. And so this is why I appreciate that we've kept Fanachu going after 9 years, this podcast. And you can tell by the amount of tsungi, the amount of gray in my beard, how long we've had this podcast. When you look at and you look at me, you can, how many kids I have now at this point, how long we've had this podcast. But um, but this is why we have this, because when we when we think about our stories, when we hear the stories of others, this is how we make ourselves stronger, especially, when we think about January and we're thinking about starting a new year and we look to Imanyat Lutagi Otrubandan Pacific when we look to Hawaii and we think about how they are about to sort of remember one of their most tragic recent anniversaries, when they are about to remember the overthrow of their kingdom. And so that is why I am so glad to have with me here Ciara Leina, the director, the writer of The Queen's Flowers, who created this beautiful animated short, and one of the most touching things for me about this film is that Queen Lili'uokalani is a name, of course, that's in the history books that so many remember for the overthrow. And it's important that we remember that sort of as the last Hawaiian monarch. But this film builds off of that and then also gives her so much life and gives her and the Hawaiian people so much love instead of just being a tragic trivia note, instead of what it could be reduced to. And so that's why I'm so glad that you've joined me for this episode. Aloha and hafa day. Thank you for coming on to Fanatsu.
Aloha, half a day. Mahalo for having me. Um, I've been thinking about greetings and how we greet each other. And one of my favorite greetings is Aloha pumehana e napua mai ka puka ana ke kau ano kala. And um, it's a reference to, the puka ana, or the this rising to the setting and the rising of the sun, and knowing that we're connected but on different sides of the Pacific right now. It's been crossing my mind, and really excited to make this connection and, talk about a point in history for Kanaka, for Hawaiians, that is traumatic. And how do we access, understand, and process our histories in ways that are productive for us as Pacifica peoples? And that's something I think a lot about. Um, and that was one of the pieces of this story that really I connected with, the idea of taking a figure that we know in history and going past that point of trauma. Who were they afterwards? How did they carry themselves? You know, um, what were the things they did, knowing that there were so many devastating things that had happened? How do you carry on after that? What is that resiliency? What is that fortitude? And it was a real personal education for me.
Mm, that's so beautiful and that's so profound because I think that, that speaks to, because I think for, speaking from the Chamorro perspective in decolonization and in movements, there's always this drive to find the heroic figure who stands strong. And we always need that.
Mhm.
But so many people struggle to survive and to live and look for the energy to keep going. And so that's why even in just what you were saying there, I think that's important. How, because it's one thing to kind of to show up once, but it's another to keep showing up or to find the power and the energy to keep going even when you've lost once, you've lost a few times, when it seems like the entire ocean is moving against you, everything is going against you. And so it's I think, for when I speak, especially, because I've been a community activist for quite a while now. I've been a scholar activist, and so as I get into the middle age, as I speak to those who are younger than me now, I reflect on, thinking about how is it that because there's always this desire to look for the right moment, the viral moment, but it's like you also need that ability to be around still, to be there. And so, I think when I was when I, and I want to share the trailer real fast and then, give a little bit more context too. But just in speaking about sharing what really touched me about this too, is just that I think for a lot of people, they might even imagine that Queen Lili'uokalani's story ends with the overthrow. That
Absolutely.
that's it for her, that
Disappeared
Tabzaman,
to history.
nothing more.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think in it was there's in this short film, it's so appropriate that there's flowers, and it's full of life because it really plants the seeds for the imagination to think and remember that she lived many years beyond that, and she did so much beyond that to try to help and build and keep her community strong. And so that's what I found it
Oh,
powerful in so many ways. Go ahead.
yeah. What do we call it? We call it grit. We call it showing up, right? And it's so easy to give up, to let it win, right? To let them win. And um our ability to pivot, our ability to process and move forward, not to forget, but to find our way to continue is essential. And I think that's one of the beautiful things I learned from her, which is she persevered, she stayed steadfast. Her thematically, she believed in onipa'a, to be steadfast, to hold on to, but still was committed to community. And I think that was one of the things that kept her going. It was never just about her. And I think as Pacifica people, our understanding in the world isn't about the American protection of the I or the individual. We're island people, so our understanding is our physical space and the people that occupy it. We are oriented towards the we, and because of that, or worldview orientation, it's more than just the tragedy for myself. right? The recovery is for us, and the fight is for us collectively.
No, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I'm so sorry, it's my fault. We've jumped into it. I've been so excited for this episode. We've jumped into it. I have poor host protocol, bad host protocol. So let's
Let's not the
check out
trailer.
let's check out the let's check out the trailer, excuse me, real fast. And then okay, hold on. Let me share real quick. All right, Estigate.
Thank you.
Lama-lama iluna ka olohila kahi ko ua ko ulala kaho ailon ka o ke kamama he te mai na kupuna.
Oh, so cute. Hi. Second. All right. So let's okay, so where to begin with this story? So where to begin with this story? So first off, some people watching this may not be familiar with the Hawaiian overthrow. And I think we need to start there because, one of the Hawaii remains a big tourist destination. Many people, not just billionaires, think of Hawaii as their paradise, their getaway location. And so, can you tell us a little bit of that history first off to give Queen Lili'uokalani that context in terms of what does it mean that she was the last Hawaiian monarch?
Wow. Acknowledging that I am not a historian, but I
And
would do
oh, and
as
I'll share the link
thank you.
I'll share the link to so I'm going to share the links for everyone to the website, and and while you're talking though I'll also put it on the screen so people can see it too. So but go ahead and start sharing.
No, this is a great question. The islands of Hawaii were their own autonomous sovereign like nation. It had its own constitutional monarchy. Um, and Lili'uokalani became became queen at the death of her brother Kalakaua. So after he passed, she took over the throne. Um, there was a collection of businessmen um, who then decided to instate a coup and take over the country. Oftentimes, people assume they were American. The truth is, they were actually, many of them were actually members of the nation of Hawaii. So their act was treason. Um, they imprisoned the queen in her own palace and subsequently took over the country. Um, there had been a precedence for this previously. The British had done something similar, where they had taken over Hawaii, but then returned it. That precedence left an optimism that the United States would do the same, and a hope for that. And then contextually also, whew, the introduction of foreigners to Hawaii, as often happens to isolated communities, brought in new diseases that our people were not prepared for, lacked the immunity for. And so prior to contact, there's about 1 million Hawaiians. By the time Lili'u took reign, I would call it an Armageddon of population. We were down to about 80 to 10 to 20% of what our population had been pre-contact. It was devastating. And so a lot of the choices that Lili'u made uh, during the overthrow were predicated on this idea that we were trying to hold on to what we had. So the idea of loss of life, of bloodshed, knowing that 1 in 10 people, or sorry, 9 out of 10 people were gone, right? This is massive. Like 8 out of 10 people were gone. And so what do you do when there's not much left? you know, the decision making and the choices were all based on that. And so the idea of bloodshed was not an option for her. The idea of preservation was, and with the expectation that the right thing would happen. And so, you know, she went on through her life with the expectation and always advocating for the return of her community. She famously wore black in protest of the overthrow, always in mourning of the loss of her country. But it's important to also mention that she wasn't an angry person. She had a lot of like Victorian ideals of forgiveness. And at some point, even sat in the same room with the same men who had taken over her nation. After, of course, after the overthrow, there was a lot of horrific things said about her. Horrific things, cartoons portraying her as a monkey-like creature. A lot of offensive things done in the public. Different ways that they would reference her, no longer calling her queen, they would call her Mrs. Dominus. Very like intentional. There's like death by 1,000 cuts. And yet her fortitude and who she was and how she carried herself meant that she eventually, when people, you know, many years post overthrow, people began to reference her as the former queen. And there was a certain nostalgia by the same people that removed her from her throne for the nation that it had been, that quaint country. The ironies, of course. And then just a recognition that she didn't just give up. She still had stayed steadfast in the idea of the return of her nation and still knew that there was important things that she could do to support her community. She established a bank for women because women couldn't bank at in that time. So super progressive. She established a foundation called the Queen Lili'uokalani Trust, or Children's Trust, to provide support for Native Hawaiian children, oftentimes those who are orphaned, to provide them with the support needed so they could thrive. So there's a lot of, and still composing and writing songs. So long-winded answer, but you know, so often when we think of her, because of the overthrow, it stops with that. That's the thing. But this is a human that, despite that horrific event, that horrific tragedy, continued on and doubled down and invested in still doing good for her people. And this idea of this gifting of giving what she could, and always thinking of others, is an innately Hawaiian perspective, and something that I hope in this film that we continue this tribute to. You know, it doesn't matter what you have, but what can you do to give back and to say thank you?
Oh, wow, beautiful. No, beautiful. Thank you so much for giving that context. And
That was a long answer.
it was a very good it was a very good answer. I mean, especially, you know, you gave a lot of critical details that a lot of people, because even people who think they know the story, you even talked about you know, some Native Hawaiian complicity, and some people don't even know that, you know. You know, some Hawaiian complicity in these sorts of issues, that it wasn't as simple as a lot of people might think, that you know, and that's how complicated these issues of imperialism and colonization can be. And so, but I love the way that you really gave a lot of depth and humanity to the figure of Queen Lili'uokalani and how you were describing her, in the same way that the film does as well. And so I want to share real quick with everyone watching. And so, and Sidus Masi, it's good to be back. I already see some people who are tuning in half a day. I've missed all of you. I hope that you've missed me. And so I'm going to share the website real fast. If you have any questions, I see a few of you have already sent in some questions, but if you do have any questions, put in the comments, send me a message. You can remember, you can tie your question to a hermit crab and it'll get here eventually. Um, Here we go. Estigate. This here is the website. And it's a lovely website. You can already get a sense, of course, of the animation style, the beautiful animation style we were looking at. Oh, and I see here, of course, that that Disney's Moana is a part of this too.
Yes, we were very fortunate to get the support of a fellow Kanaka, Auli'i Carvalho, came on as executive producer late in 2024. So really honored and proud to have her support.
Oh, wow. And so some of what Ciara was talking about, you can see here if you want to learn more about Queen Lili'uokalani and how she really, she really built on what she believed in, that she, you know, that even if she could not fight back against the United States, which was colonizing her islands, annexing and taking over, then she would build up her community, build up and support and elevate the status of women, in her islands and so on. And so you can find out more about that. And you can find out, about the film as well, where you can watch it, and of course some of the awards too that the film has won. And so now I do want to ask, I'm going to share some stills, but I do want to ask though, because this story takes place towards the end in the last few years of the Queen's life.
Yes.
So, what is the inspiration for the story? How did this particular story come about? I read that it's of course a magical take on a true story. So where does this where does this magical take come from?
Great question. In 2017, I had just finished my first documentary film, feature documentary film. It was called Out of State. It was about the experience of Native Hawaiian men in the prison system in the United States. And on the heels of that, I met with a fellow filmmaker. Her name was Connie Salcido Trejo, and she's Mexican American, and she had moved to Hawaii and was dancing hula under Kumumalia Helela. And one day at hula class, Kumumalia shared a family story, an Ohana story about her tutu. And one day they were at dinner with Tutu or their grandmother, and they found out that Tutu was going to school at St. Andrew's Priory, which is a private school in Hawaii, in Honolulu, around the same time that Queen Lili'uokalani lived next door. And so the family had to ask, did you ever meet the queen? And Tutu Emma turned to everyone and she said with a wink and a smile, she said, I used to steal her flowers. Now, I don't advocate that we steal flowers from queens, but the background to that was when a queen comes to your house and comes to, your school, and many of the girls lived there, you have to bestow a lei upon her as traditional greeting. And there were no flowers to sow a lei with on the campus. So the girls used to sneak into the queen's garden and pick her beautiful flowers because the queen had beautiful gardens. And then they would sow a lei to give back to the queen. And everyone always kind of knew. There was a little bit of a game. Everyone always kind of knew that's what the girls were doing. But it was a fun way to pay tribute to the queen, and this is the genesis of the story. And you know, I as a Hawaiian felt like, okay, how do we take this beautiful little story and flesh it out and help provide context and understanding for the queen's experience at that time of life. There's it's hard not to access the queen there without the understanding of the overthrow, but also not to let it weigh us down. And for me personally, I'd like to think of the film as a way to gift her back. What she and so many of our monarchs had done, bequeathing their estates, bequeathing what they had in trust to our people, and then giving the opportunity to support us in perpetuity, has done wonders for so many of our people. And obviously there's so much more work to be done, but I know that I've been a beneficiary of the work that these monarchs had put into ensuring the survival of their people and the thriving of their people. So this is my little gift back to her.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Oh, and I'll share some of the stills from the I was stills from the film now, and you can see the, for those of you, you know, we watched the trailer earlier, but now you can get a sense of the feel and the art style of the film. And of course, this here, you can see the queen during the overthrow, and then the contrast to later the queen uh, in her garden. Oh, oh, I agree. So, oh, and so now I understand that um, in the film, you know, we hear young children singing from the Kamehameha schools, and that you attended the Kamehameha schools as well. And
Yes.
so, what was that like? What was that experience like, sort of bringing, because I think, you know, I imagine for Queen Lili'uokalani, that was one of the pains, but one of the hopes is thinking into the future, what will happen to the people, you know? This is a change in power, it's a change in flag, and it could mean everything, but if we stay strong, then you know, we can survive this. And so a lot of it will come down to the children. What happens next with the children? What do they feel? What do they think? How are they connected? And so that's why I think, you know, I found that the story that you told about young children feeling like that connection to the queen and seeing her, and you know, I thought that was an appropriate sort of vehicle for telling this now. But then um yeah, having young Hawaiian children today sort of be part of this too, I thought that was also very poetic and beautiful as well. And so for you, as somebody who attended that school, you know, thinking of this as your own gift, you know, what was this experience like?
Oh, well, you know, the school itself was founded by Princess Bernice Pauahi Bishop, who incidentally did take care of Lili'uokalani. So on the death of Abner Paki, Lili'u actually became a ward of uh, Mr. and Mrs. Bernice Pauahi Bishop, and they cared for her. Um, so there is this beautiful connection between this school and Lili'u. Um, the school itself, much like the trust that Lili'u had established, was created to support orphans, indigenous, and native, with a preference to supporting orphaned, indigenous, or indigent and native Hawaiian children. So the goal of the school is to provide education for those that need, specifically Hawaiians, and that mission has continued until today. Um, I'm grateful to have been a product of an education there. It was an opportunity for me to gain a lot of like cultural perspective and education that I don't think I would have been able to access in other spaces at that time. I think things are different in the state now. There are a lot of like other incredible institutions, and there were then, but there's a lot more now. It was my way to acknowledging the film that you had worked on. It was my opportunity to create a connection to language that my family didn't have, a reconnection to language. Um, you know, my mother didn't speak, her sisters didn't speak Hawaiian. I had the privilege to learn starting in the 7th grade at Kamehameha. And so knowing all these things the school had done for me, um, being able to create this very like Hawaiian story with as many Hawaiians as possible, and then acknowledging that Kamehameha has incredible singers. You know, Lili'u herself was a brilliant composer, a brilliant musician. In fact, many of the monarchs in her time frame were incredible musicians. A little fun fact, let me see if I can grab that. Um, she was part of a group called Nalani Eha. Let me see if I can make sure I'm referencing this properly. Which was composed of, I believe, let me see if I can get this. Yes. David Kalakaua, Miriam Likelike, and William Leleohoku. And they were all in a group together known as Nalani Eha, and they were brilliant musicians. Lili'u specifically had over 150 songs attributed to her. So she composed,
Wow.
that's a lot. And we still sing her songs today. And the hero song, the big song that we hear throughout the film, that the choir sings, was written by Lili'u. So, there's a lot of like subtle coding. There's a lot of what I call Kanaka coding in the film. So for Hawaiians, if you know, you know. And these are the fun things that for those that are interested can kind of like pick apart and learn. Um, but yeah, this idea of bringing the film back to Kamehameha, working with fellow students, specifically with this idea of working with other Hawaiian children who love to sing. It was super fun, and I was very nervous.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Despite your nervousness, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. And that your mentioning of Kanaka coding is interesting though, because this the Queen's Flowers, it's won awards, it's been screened, around in places where, Native Hawaiians are not the majority of the people who are watching it. And so I've wondered though, what has the response been? Has it resonated with people? Have they understood the history, or has it connected with them in other ways? So as you have traveled, first off, what are some of the places that you've screened it at? And then what are some of the responses from different communities that have watched it?
No, this is a great question. And one that I'm excited to share because we didn't know. You make the thing and you don't know who's gonna want to watch it. You don't even know if your cousin's gonna watch it. I've had films I've made, my cousin's not gonna watch it, and that's okay. It's not for them. So you just never know. You'll find an audience, but you never know how it's gonna connect. And it's not a surprising question. We were wondering who's gonna want to see this film. Um, and I'm grateful to say that it has screened all around the world. It has screened it is screened in Singapore and won awards. It has screened in the Czech Republic and won awards. Atlanta, Georgia in the US, Kosovo, uh, Beijing. I'm reading off the list. Bengaluru, India, Hollywood, California, um, Taos, New Mexico, or no, not Taos, Santa Fe, Hungary, Budapest, Hungary, Wales, Greece, Turkey, Taipei. Um, it's it's been really interesting. Like I had no idea where the connections would be found. And I will say that a lot of communities that do have an understanding of colonization have found a connection with it. Um, I also think that oddly, the film was designed for children, and I think it holds with adults as well, but a lot of children-sided film festivals, particularly with kids on the juries, have really connected with the movie, which has been really interesting. Um, I've been surprised along the way that people would watch and they would connect with the work. Do they understand everything? Probably not. Um, and I think one of the things that I think is, as we're creating work, I always know there are going to be layers of meaning for everybody. So the base layer are the basic elements of a story, something that anyone can access. Have we as a team achieved that? And then the next layer is, okay, what is the layer for Hawaiian scene that they're gonna get? And it's like as long as the basics are there and we're telling a human story with emotion, like I'm optimistic people will find a connection. And I feel like for others, yeah, maybe they're not going to get all the things a Hawaiian will get. But maybe it'll spark something in them that they'll want to go seek other information out. Um, and also like, yeah, and sometimes that's okay. Not everything needs to be understood on every level, or maybe you go back and watch and you'll get something else. So
No, again, that's a good point. I think that's a very good point, especially nowadays when, yeah, everything is, people are always thinking about you have to know the secrets of everything. And, people are
so
always
much
like,
pressure, man. It's a
yeah,
little
I'm
pressure.
I'm always like, no, it's okay. You don't have to, or I always feel like we can know some things for ourselves. We don't have to tell everyone everything. It's
Agreed on
kind of
that.
like yeah, you don't have to share everything with everybody else. I mean, when you think about, think about because even here on Guam, for example, as people are trying to talk about the restarting the tourism industry after COVID, people
Mm,
are thinking, oh, we need to bring more culture into the tourism industry. And it's good that people are talking about that, but some people are reminding us, yeah, but it's not like you want the tourists to actually come into your house and hang out with your family, because some of your culture is for sharing and promoting and connecting with others, but then other parts of it are your own, and you don't have to, because if you're just throwing it all out there, then
yeah.
it's not yours anymore. And part of the culture has to be about you and your community, your family, and that's it. So that's why yeah, that's why I really like that phrase that you even said earlier, that Kanaka coding, that idea that, but I love that there's universal aspects so people can see it and feel connected to it. But then just that idea too, that some people who are Native Hawaiian can feel it on another level. People who went to Kamehameha school can feel it on a different level. Even people who know Hawaiian history real well can feel it on a whole entirely different level. But that's good. I like that. I like that. Um, I'm curious to know more. I'm hearing from a few different Chamorros about sort of what they think about it. And so send me your comments, because in a little bit I'm going to ask some of your questions or your comments about what you think about this, because the Chamorro perspective is of course very different. We don't have any history of sort of a monarchy, or our start to colonization is much earlier in the Pacific. The Spanish um, claim our islands in the 1600s, much earlier than when it starts to happen elsewhere in the Pacific. So our connection to that, to our past prior to colonization, is greatly disrupted, happens much earlier.
Mm,
And so that's why it's always good for I always it's always encouraging to hear from others in the Pacific where they're talking about their struggles too, because sometimes for Chamorros, we feel like odd out in the Pacific, first to feel the touch of European colonization, because
mm,
Magellan stumbled on our islands first.
mm,
And so the first one to get the genocide, I guess.
mm.
Um, and so, but yes, but for me, one of the things that I think resonated with, and I've gotten a few comments. And so some of the questions that I'm getting though are really about flowers. And so I have some questions about
Yeah.
flowers.
Yeah.
Um, One of the things that I think resonated with some Chamorros who saw it is just, even if people are familiar with sort of Queen Lili'uokalani, but even just that relationship with a revered elder, especially a woman, a matriarch, and sort of just that incredible power that a revered woman can have, but also, like you described earlier, that the playfulness and how there's the wonderful joy like no other, how somebody like a grandmother, a great grandmother, can command so much power and respect and authority, but also if you can have that relationship with them where you can also tease, and they can and they'll tell jokes, and just that is one of the most nurturing and powerful relationships that you can have. It's one of the most intimate and meaningful relationships between that matriarchal figure who is so strong and so nurturing, but can also be so playful. And so anyways, that's what I loved too.
No, and Lili'u loved children. She
Mm,
never physically had any of her own,
mm.
but absolutely loved children. And so, even with the relationship with the girls at the school next door, she went over regularly. She would help them with their music. She would critique their performances. She had that relationship. She used to keep candy in her pockets that she would then give to the girls. So the girls knew that when Lili'u came, they would get a little candy. So, there was a lot of like, obviously she was like an impressive figure, on so many levels, but also just, and there was a lot of protocol, Hawaiian protocol in terms of how you interact with a queen. But she just, the love was there. The love was there.
Oh. Okay. All right. I had this question on my list, and so I have a few people that are asking. And so can you talk about some of the flowers in the film and sort of are they, because this is something that we are facing in Guam in terms of our pushes for decolonization, where we're trying to bring out more native
Ooh.
species
Oh, let's
versus
talk about
invasive
that.
species,
Let's
because
talk about
the
that.
tourism industry really likes the invasive, ornamental, exotic species. But so in the film, and then for you, um, are these native species that have like a lot of significant indigenous significance? And so can you talk about that? I've gotten a few people
Ooh,
that are interested.
this is a great question and a very rich topic at home as well. If you walk through Waikiki today, very little to few of the plants, vegetation that you'll see is actually native or indigenous. So much of the iconography we connect with in the Pacifica or assume is native or indigenous to the regions are the products of outsiders bringing in the expected vegetation. The bird of paradise is not native Hawaiian, right? So how do we how do we address that issue? And that's something that a lot of people are thinking and finding ways to reclaim our native and indigenous species. Really beautiful efforts, like to the point where Home Depot, which is like, I don't know if you have it in Guam, but Home Depot in Hawaii will sell rare and indigenous native plants now. And that's, yes, yes. And that's like the effort of some really amazing Hawaiians and horticulturalists that are looking to take these plants and put them back into the community. And they're also doing that in terms of landscaping. Now, how does this connect back to the film and lei making? I will say that Hawaiians and Native and Indigenous people as a whole, we're incredibly adaptable. Something comes in, we use it. So, a lot of the lei that we love and cherish today are made from materials that are not native or indigenous. They were brought to Hawaii, and as Hawaiians, again, adaptable, saw, okay, we can use this, let's use it. So, we can the push to start using more of our native indigenous like plants and vegetation, absolutely, but also recognizing a lot of the traditions that we built out of necessity and access are from that. And then recognizing that I don't think anyone particularly thought about in that era or understood that the introduction of foreign species would mean the elimination of the native species, because they as outsiders would come and overtake the landscape. And so I think that Lili'u, in terms of her garden, she kept meticulous records. Oh, gorgeous, meticulous records of all the plants that she kept in her gardens. Her gardens at Washington Place, where she lived through the sunset years of her life. Her gardens at Uluhai Malama, which were her cherished gardens in Paoa, so up more mountainside. So she knew exactly what plants and vegetation she was using. Were they all native or indigenous? No. But these were the flowers of the day. So a lot of these were like Victorian era flowers that were being brought from other places and was the fashion. Just as in England, they would grow like Italian style like oranges inside their homes as like a way to say that there was a richness, a sophistication, right? Like these sort of crazy things that were being done in that time, introducing things from other places to suggest an idea of like sophistication. And so the fashion of the day. There was a mix of flowers and vegetation at Lili'u's home. Um, some of them native, some of them not. And so even the hero flower that you see in the film, the pua kalaunu, pua meaning flower and Hawaiian kalaunu meaning crown, so the crown flower, which is what we reference it as. It's not a native or indigenous flower, but it was one of the queen's favorites. The queen had two things that she loved that went together, like peanut butter and jelly. It was the butterfly and the crown flower. And little cakier kids growing up in Hawaii know that the monarch butterfly absolutely loves the crown flower. And the monarch butterfly, as a larvae, grows, eats off the plant, and then builds its chrysalis on the crown flower, and then one day bursts forth from it as a full-blown butterfly. And so acknowledging the queen's love of those two things, of the butterfly, the pulelehua, and also of the pu'okalaunu, the crown flower, we included those in the film. So for people that know, they know. If you look at the queen, she also wears a brooch on her chest. It's a butterfly brooch. Maybe the top photo, the one just, yeah, let's see if it's, you can't see it in this, but she regularly, maybe in the photo of her as an older woman, there you go. So you see the brooch there. That is, again, a point of accuracy. She wore the brooch, and that was one of her favorite things. So, the content in the film, everything has been lovingly built off of reference images from the era. So we have an archive of hundreds of photos that we collected across multiple archives to really give a sense of what the physical space was at the time as accurately as we could.
Oh, wow. Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And that's nice to hear though that Home Depot can be
So
changed.
cool. So cool.
Very cool
So
because
cool.
Home Depot here is definitely not a source of native species, but it's good to know that they can that if enough people push, maybe they will change.
I went to my dad's house, the other day or maybe a year or two ago, and there was a plant with a red stick in it. And I was like, what is this, Dad? And he's like, oh, it's a native. I don't remember what berry it was. It was a native berry. I'd never heard of it. That's the
Oh,
degree of erasure, right? The
mm,
degree of erasure. And how cool was it that my father could put that in his yard, in his suburban yard? The coolest thing in the world.
very
And
cool.
this shouldn't be radical. This idea
Hmm.
should not be radical, right?
Ugh,
Why? But it's like, and I'm sure when they started, there's a gentleman named Rick Barboza who I've actually interviewed with on another project, my upcoming film. And he has a company called Huiku Maoli'ola, and they are a Native and Indigenous only plant nursery, and they're commercial, so they sell for profit. But they have this nonprofit mindset, or this like community-minded mindset, where they are growing these plants that we don't see. They're propagating plants we don't see, where they're propagating plants that are rare, native, and giving them life and putting them into places where we as a community can access it. Holy cow, the absolute coolest thing in the world. And so, I'm excited to be able to share that what they've been able to achieve, in the hopes that this inspires somebody else somewhere else to do the same thing, because it's radical but so simple. How cool is that?
oh, very cool. Oh, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. And let's keep talking about flowers though, because
Wow.
one of the things that I read, of course, is that, your family used to make leis or still makes leis. I don't know. Or you grew up picking flowers, making leis, and that was, and so can you can you talk about this? Is it
Yeah.
is it something so for I do have to ask because sometimes the things that we do as part of family businesses, there's trauma, sometimes there's joy, sometimes it's a mix, sometimes it's a mix. So,
Yeah. Thank you for asking. No, it was a fun thing. Like, my grandfather had like it was a normal house, but on a larger plot. And he was very good at growing things. And my mother and her best friend's sister, my auntie Sandra, they, as housewives in the 80s, 90s, had side hustle. And so they would go and they'd bring all the kids, and the kids would run into the fields and pick flowers, myself included. We would pick green rose. And again, which of these are native? One of them, one of the list I'm going to give you. Pikake, otherwise known as jasmine. Um, Frangipani or plumeria, Huamelia. We would just, green rose, I don't know the Hawaiian name for it. I could make something up, but no, Stephanotis. There was a lot, Lantern lima. The only native plant that we sowed was, oh, and we grew pakalana as well. And I don't know what the English or like scientific word for would be for it, but was ilima. We grew ilima, and ilima was and I don't know how native the form of ilima we were with sowing, but there's the only thing closest to that. And so the kids would run out into the fields with buckets and bungee cords, and we would shake the bushes so we don't get stung by a bee. and we would clip the flowers of stems, and my mother and my auntie would sit and sew. And then we'd go back to the airport and we would sell the lace to Arthur's Lace Stand at the airport or to some grocery stores. So Safeway and Mililani, where we grew up, we'd go back and we'd sell the lace. And it was like a great way for, our moms to stay culturally connected and to make money. Make money. My mother's still super fast, yo. My mother's 84. And I asked her to like work on making tilifle with me the other day, and she was like scoffing at me. She was like, "Why are you so slow?" And I was like, "Yo, my mom is fast. My mom is fast."
No, oh, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. And that it's wonderful how you connected that it connects very well. Your family, your family business, your upbringing into this story. And then you also mentioned then that the next project has a flower connection as well. And so,
Oh,
I let's talk about, and I didn't get a chance to ask you at the beginning, but I do want to give you a chance just to talk about what so from starting in flowers with your family, how did you get into filmmaking? Like, how did you get into this path though?
I'll give you a quick answer. I had an obsession with music videos. So they
Mm,
used to be super cool when I was growing up. I didn't have MTV. I don't know who watches it now, but we didn't have cable. We had like three TV stations, and I was always envious of the kids that had that. And I just loved music, and I loved this art form that like enhanced your experience with a song. That song takes you and it just like catches your emotion, and then there's like another way to experience it all over again with a visual. And my mother and all of her friends and were at the time what we would call like activists. They were Native Hawaiian activists, and now we call them protectors. And so combining those two things, I think, is what kind of led me to this field and this path. And I think a lot of my work speaks to something that Chelsea Winstanley out of New Zealand once said, this idea of visual sovereignty. And the phrase is like stuck with me. And I think it's so beautiful. And as much as we can create these images that reinforce a power vision of where we'd like to be, that gives us a place to go to.
oh, thank you. That was a solid and short answer. Very good. No, thank you. Thank you. And now what are you working on next? So what's a, documentary and more animated projects? What's on the horizon?
I'm not allowed to say everything because people will faint.
Then
Because as this filmmakers, you're always there's so much to do, and there's one more thing.
oh
You know what I
mm,
mean? Like if I
mm,
gave you the list, it's too long. But I will say this: I have the privilege of working with a fellow Kanaka. Her name is Kristen Marquez, and we
mm,
are working on a project called "Lucky We Live Hawaii." It's about the struggle for Native Hawaiians to stay connected to our ancestral lands and the intentionality of history to push us from it. So it's about the formation of the tourism industry as a product of the overthrow, and how that has influenced our housing insecurity. And the fact that so many, not solely like these are multifactorial, but like some of the influences that have led to so many of our people living outside of home. And I'm not critical of the choice to live in diaspora. I think we are all entitled to free will and live where we please. But when we're not given the opportunity to feel like we have choice, then I'm critical of it. If a Hawaiian wants to live in Hawaii, absolutely. If a Hawaiian wants to live anywhere, absolutely. But if you want to live at home, what a tragedy that the struggle exists.
no, I hear you. No, I hear you. It's uh I had on Chris from Dear Aloha last month,
Who I
and
love, and that's a phenomenal film.
oh yes, and so we talked a lot about that, and like so many Pacific Islanders, every people have diasporas, but for Islanders, of course, diasporas are like not just a part of life, they're like the new realities because like for Chamorros, there are for Chamorros and other islanders, there are just far more of you away from your islands. And then, so I don't know if that's the same true for Native Hawaiians yet, that there are
Yes.
just far more of you in the States than in the Hawaiian Islands.
Percentage wise, it's actually tipped just a bit above, where over 50% are outside of our lands. And how some of this falls down to statistics and how we catch numbers, but
Mm.
that is absolutely meaningful, those numbers, knowing that at least half, if not more, exist outside of the islands. And growing up, my mother's two sisters. So my grandfather had four daughters, and I'll make this quick. Two moved to the greater Seattle area, and two stayed at home in Hawaii. And absolutely, they were entitled to make these decisions. I think they made decisions thinking about what would be best for their families. But I don't know if the economics aside, they would have made those choices. And so, how does this impact our families, fracture our families? How does this create a sense of identity? And how do we overcome that? Knowing that these numbers exist. So much growing up, it was, you're not real Hawaiian because you never grew up. So you never grew up here. So you don't know. You don't know how to act. Right. And I want to challenge that notion. I want to challenge the idea that Native is only connected to land. The idea of connection to land is essential, but also when so many of us aren't there, I don't want people feeling like they don't belong.
No, that sounds good.
You want a connection, you want to work for it, you put in the effort. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can still be Hawaiian.
No, absolutely, absolutely. That was one project. Did you have more? Just kidding. I'm just kidding.
That's the big. That's the
That's a
big.
really big one though. That's a really big one though. Yes. You're going to solve diaspora. No, I'm kidding.
That's what I would say, that's the good trouble on the horizon. That's the piece of good trouble we're pushing on the horizon.
No, that's I did. Now, I apologize. This usually happens. I had more questions. We had a few more comments, but we're about out of time right now. And so I want to give you, though, a chance to share some final thoughts about the film or, anything else. Anything else about, especially about the film, like, or about stuff that people, yeah, resources out there about the project or anything else, even about the anniversary this week, if you'd like to
Ah.
share anything about that. But yes, the podcast is yours.
Oh, well, again, thank you for this opportunity to connect with you and everyone out there, generous enough to be listening. And I don't think it was by accident that we're meeting the same week as the anniversary or the remembrance of the overthrow. I choose not to use the word commemoration. We choose to say remembrance. And thinking on what this all means this week. I don't know. I just want to leave everyone with a sense of power and promise and hope, despite all the things that we're seeing today. The worst can happen and we can still do beautiful things together. And we can still make this world better. And as things, when we do see bad things, it's almost imperative for us to double down on the good. We got to do twice as good. We have to put more good out into the world, because the more good we can put out, the more we can tip the balance, and so yeah, it's been an honor and a pleasure, and not a surprise that we're talking about this project now. And if anyone wants to stay connected to it, we'll be giving updates on Instagram at the Queen's Flowers Film, or on our website, thequeensflowersfilm.com. This film is a gift to everyone, so we will be giving it out to the world for free with educational materials to match, and hoping to be able to release those and all of that content later this year. So, follow us on Instagram and or check our website. By the fall, we hope to be able to release those materials, and you can watch the full film and give yourself a little education to go with it.
Oh, mahalo. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ciara, for being here, for sharing your film, sharing history, sharing this time of solemn commemoration, but sharing wonderful stories from Hawaii and wonderful stories from this project. It's a good way to start 2025 for this podcast. And so I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Happy 2025, everyone. Wishing everyone the best.
Hungyanan, para hamzu todos ni umeega para umeekungok, si Zeus masi, who agradece hamzu esti finakpuesti, primer episode Fanachu, adios, esta aquí manat